You think 100 cows can teach me a lesson? Watch closely. The gravel crunched under my boots as I ran across the orchard, the morning sun reflecting off dew-covered apple trees, the air thick with the earthy smell of damp soil and hay. A low hum of movement filled the orchard before I even saw them, and then there they were, cows spread across the rows like an uninvited army, munching on leaves and brushing against the trunks with surprising gentleness yet leaving a trail of chaos behind them. My heart pounded not with fear, but with disbelief and rising determination. I stopped at the edge of the orchard, wiping a thin sheen of sweat from my brow as I took in the sight. Branches bent under weight, fruit strewn across the ground, the rich scent of crushed apples mixing with the musky aroma of the cattle. I had spent years nurturing these trees, counting every bloom, mapping the sunlight across each row to ensure optimal growth, and here it was all under siege, orchestrated by Margaret Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of Willowbrook Estates, smiling from her SUV parked at the far edge, her perfectly manicured nails resting casually on the wheel as she surveyed the scene like a general admiring her troops. The air felt electric, each movement of the cattle sending a vibration through the soil, crunching twigs beneath hooves and adding a staccato rhythm to the chaos. I could hear Maggie's voice cutting across the orchard, syrupy with false sweetness, announcing her satisfaction with her plan, her words fluttering like dry leaves in the breeze. Maybe this will teach you to follow HOA rules. The metallic scent of the nearby fencing posts, displaced and bent from a half-hearted attempt to contain them, mingled with the earthy tones and the faint tang of manure, a sensory cocktail that cemented the absurdity of the moment. I crouched by the base of an apple tree, running a hand over the rough bark, feeling the familiar grooves, and made a silent vow, my pulse sinking with the distant lowing of the herd. I was Ethan Caldwell, a man with a life built on patience, soil, and the rhythm of seasons, and I was not about to let this spectacle dictate the outcome. The morning light shifted, casting long shadows from the trees onto the scattered fruit and hoof prints, each step of the cows leaving a clear mark, like a ledger of mischief that I would later reference. I could almost taste the metallic tang of anticipation in the air, my mouth dry as I surveyed the full scope of the intrusion, noting every branch scratched, every fence post nudged, every trail of trampled grass. My mind began to work, cataloging options, legal avenues, photographic evidence, and witness accounts, each detail clicking into place as though the orchard itself was whispering strategies. And as Maggie waved and smirked from the SUV, I breathed in the sharp scent of apple blossoms mingled with the musky aroma of the herd, feeling the tension coil into a plan that was meticulous and deliberate, ready to transform this early morning chaos into a story of smart, inevitable justice. The orchard smelled of crushed apples and fresh earth, a mix of sweetness and soil that reminded me why I had chosen this land. Each tree bore the scars of the morning chaos, bent branches and trampled saplings, yet the roots were strong, digging deep into the loamy soil that I had nurtured for over a decade. I walked slowly between the rows, my boots sinking slightly into the damp ground, feeling the uneven terrain underfoot, listening to the low murmur of the remaining cattle as they moved with uncertain steps, their hooves clattering against the scattered mulch. The sunlight pierced through the orchard canopy, creating patches of gold on the ground, and the shadows stretched long and thin, mirroring the tension that ran through me. I paused by a particularly large apple tree, placing my hand against its rough bark, tracing the grooves where I had once marked the date of planting, and felt a familiar resolve harden in my chest. This was more than just a disruption. It was an infringement on years of careful planning, late nights, early mornings, and the rhythm of seasons that had guided me in every pruning, every watering, every measurement of sunlight. I pulled my notebook from my jacket pocket, the pages still crisp, filled with diagrams, planting schedules, and notes on soil composition, each detail a testament to the work invested in this land. I made a list, mentally and on paper, of every violation I had observed: trespassing animals, damaged property, displaced irrigation lines, and the surrounding fence posts that had been bent or uprooted. Each entry became a piece of evidence, a puzzle piece in a plan that was forming steadily in my mind. I stepped back and observed the perimeter, noting the distance from the orchard to the road, the angle of the sun over the neighboring property, and the positions where surveillance cameras could capture the next series of events. My hands were steady, and my breathing deepened as I ran through legal precedents and property laws in my mind, recalling consultations with neighbors and reading through the local HOA bylaws. I felt a rising clarity as I considered the logistics of reporting the incident, the documentation required, and the potential pathways to reclaim authority over my land. Every step I took was deliberate, measured against the weight of responsibility I felt for these trees, for the orchard, for the heritage that was in my care. I paused at the edge of a grove, the scent of apples mingling with the faint trace of hay and soil, and allowed myself a brief glance toward the distant SUV where Maggie had parked, her posture confident, oblivious to the meticulous cataloging of evidence underway. I imagined the scene from every angle, the cameras capturing every movement, and the documentation compiling a narrative that was undeniable, factual, and persuasive. My resolve was quiet but firm. The morning had been chaotic, but I could see the path forward clearly now. Every note, every photograph, every measurement would converge into a strategy that was precise, deliberate, and unassailable. I let my fingers trace the outline of a tree trunk, feeling the texture, the ridges, the life held within the bark, and realized that the orchard itself was guiding me toward the plan that would ensure the next chapter was controlled by me, orchestrated with intelligence, patience, and unwavering attention to detail, turning the morning's disarray into the first step of a carefully plotted course toward restoring order and asserting rightful authority over my land. Margaret Whitmore stepped closer, her polished boots crunching against the gravel at the edge of my orchard, and I felt the weight of her authority pressing down without a single word being spoken. Her smile was precise, calculated, like she had practiced it in front of a mirror 1,000 times, a rehearsed display of control that was supposed to make me hesitate, but it did nothing of the sort. I adjusted my hat, shading my eyes from the rising sun, and walked between the rows of apple trees, observing the patterns the cattle had left behind, each footprint a subtle record of intrusion, every broken twig a note in the symphony of disorder she had orchestrated. The orchard was alive with the scent of disturbed soil, crushed apples, and the faint coppery tang of metal from bent fence posts, an overwhelming collage of sensory evidence that demanded attention and analysis. I pulled my field notebook from the back pocket of my jeans, its pages filled with precise measurements, planting schedules, irrigation diagrams, and photographs from every angle I had taken over the past decade, and I started cross-referencing what had been recorded with what lay before me now. I noted the displacement of the irrigation hoses, the leaning posts that were supposed to mark each section of the orchard, and the partial destruction of protective netting around young trees, cataloging everything with meticulous care, as if each detail could become a line in a legal argument. My mind traced every possible route of evidence gathering, calculating distances for camera placement, angles for capturing the full scope of the intrusion, and times when the cows would be present, each thought moving quickly yet methodically, shaping a plan that would be undeniable. I took a deep breath, tasting the sharp air mixed with the scent of apple blossoms and the faint musky odor from the animals, letting the clarity of purpose wash over me. This was no longer just an orchard. It was a canvas of opportunity for precision, patience, and preparation. I could hear the distant hum of traffic from the main road and the faint chirping of morning birds, a natural rhythm that contrasted with the disruption in my hands, reminding me that order could be restored if approached with the right strategy. I made my way to the edge of the property line, where the fence had been pushed aside, feeling the texture of the wooden posts, the rough grain under my fingertips, grounding myself in the tangible reality of my land. Each observation became a component of the case I would construct, a chain of proof linking action to consequence, and I envisioned the documentation, photographs, and witness statements converging into an airtight narrative. My resolve solidified as I looked toward Maggie, who was still observing from her SUV, unaware of the careful, patient calculation that had begun to take shape within the boundaries of my orchard. Every sound, every smell, every mark in the dirt was now part of a structured map, guiding me toward a solution that would not rely on confrontation but on clarity, law, and evidence. The orchard seemed to hum in agreement, the leaves rustling gently as if acknowledging the plan forming in my mind, a silent partner in the meticulous orchestration of reclaiming what had been disrupted. I stepped forward, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the rows with unwavering focus, and felt the energy shift from reaction to anticipation, knowing that the groundwork for justice was being laid with careful, deliberate actions that would culminate in a resolution that was precise, measured, and undeniably mine. Margaret Whitmore remained in her SUV, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel in a rhythmic pattern that seemed designed to unsettle, yet I did not flinch. I moved through the orchard deliberately, my eyes tracing the layout I had carefully mapped over the years, noting each tree, each row, each path between the sections. The ground was uneven, scattered with fallen apples and the faint remnants of disrupted mulch, and I could feel the difference beneath my boots as I walked, the tactile feedback reinforcing every step of my assessment. I crouched to examine a sapling bent under the weight of a cow's accidental brush, the bark slightly marred but the roots still firm, and ran a hand over it, feeling the resilience that had been cultivated over seasons of careful care. The air carried the mixed scents of crushed fruit, warm soil, and the distant tang of iron from the support posts, a vivid reminder of the morning's intrusion. I began photographing the damage, adjusting angles to capture both the immediate impact and the surrounding context, each image a frame in a narrative that would become part of a structured legal argument. Notes were taken meticulously, recording times, locations, and the sequence of events, a catalog of evidence that left nothing to interpretation. I paused to listen, the low hum of activity from the remaining herd providing a constant background, their movement a natural rhythm contrasting with the deliberate intrusion orchestrated by the HOA. My notebook grew heavier with diagrams, annotations, and cross-references to local property ordinances and agricultural statutes, forming a lattice of strategy that connected each observation to potential legal avenues. I checked the perimeter fencing, noting weak points in areas where temporary barriers could guide the cattle away, simultaneously considering camera placements to ensure uninterrupted recording of any future interactions. The orchard itself seemed to respond to my presence, leaves rustling gently in a breeze that carried the scent of apple blossoms and freshly turned earth, as if acknowledging the methodical planning unfolding within it. I visualized the sequence of actions that would transform these observations into a formal complaint, integrating photographs, witness statements, and documented patterns of property disturbance into a coherent presentation. My focus sharpened on the details, the subtle tilt of a fence post, the trace of hoof prints near irrigation lines, the impression of disrupted soil under the fruit trees, each a data point contributing to a comprehensive overview of the situation. Margaret remained a distant observer, unaware that every glance, every movement, every carefully documented instance was constructing an irrefutable record. The orchard was no longer just a collection of trees and soil. It was a living map, a canvas that recorded both the chaos introduced and the deliberate, calculated response taking shape. I felt the anticipation build, a quiet energy grounded in precision, patience, and a clear understanding that the next steps would be executed with intentional, legal accuracy. I straightened, taking in the full expanse of the orchard from the top of a small rise, sunlight glinting off the scattered apples and casting long, deliberate shadows, and I could almost hear the orchard whispering, guiding me toward the actions that would convert this morning's intrusion into an opportunity for structured, deliberate justice. The afternoon sun climbed higher, casting long, dappled shadows across the orchard rows as I moved carefully between the trees, cataloging every detail of the damage and the movements of the remaining cattle. The scent of crushed apples and turned soil was strong in the warm air, mingling with the faint aroma of the distant hay bales and the lingering tang of metal from displaced fence posts. Each step on the soft earth made a subtle crunch, grounding me in the reality of the property I had nurtured for years, and I could feel the slight give of the ground beneath my boots as I measured distances for camera placement and potential barriers. I paused to check the irrigation lines, noting the bends and kinks where the cattle had disrupted the flow, and traced my fingers along the tubing, feeling the resilience of the system even under strain. My notebook grew heavier with every observation, filled with sketches, photographs, and annotations on the condition of each section of the orchard, each note a building block in a larger plan of methodical response. I noted the alignment of the rows, the angles of the sun across the branches, and the patterns left by the cows, all forming a precise map that would guide my next steps. The air carried the soft hum of distant traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves overhead, a constant reminder of the calm order outside the chaos of my orchard, and I drew strength from that contrast, knowing that structure and patience would prevail. I reviewed my notes, mentally rehearsing each action I would take, the evidence to be collected, the measurements to be recorded, and the sequence of documentation that would support my case. Each detail of the intrusion, from the disturbed mulch to the displaced fence posts and the scattered fruit, became a critical element in a carefully constructed narrative of accountability. I could sense the orchard itself affirming my plan, the leaves brushing gently against each other in the breeze, echoing the rhythm of strategy unfolding in my mind. Margaret Whitmore remained in her SUV at the far edge, seemingly unaware of the meticulous cataloging and planning occurring within the orchard, her presence a distant reminder of the provocation that had set this all into motion. I walked the perimeter again, noting gaps, potential observation points, and the placement of natural barriers, imagining the clear, factual record that would emerge from this detailed observation. Every impression in the soil, every bent branch, every step of a cow became part of a comprehensive, irrefutable record, and I felt a growing confidence that the methodical accumulation of evidence would translate into a precise, deliberate action to reclaim control over the orchard. My gaze swept the entire property from the highest rise, sunlight glinting off the remaining fruit, shadows stretching across the soil, and I allowed myself a moment to feel the weight of responsibility and the satisfaction of foresight, knowing that the next steps would be executed with measured, legal precision, turning the afternoon into an orchestrated preparation for a resolution grounded in intelligence, patience, and undeniable authority. The late afternoon sun angled across the orchard, casting golden streaks through the branches and illuminating the scattered fruit with a warm, steady light, and I could hear the subtle hum of the wind moving through the leaves, a calm counterpoint to the morning's disruption. I crouched near the edge of a particularly damaged row, running my hands along the bark of a bent apple tree, feeling its resilience, and mentally mapping every potential step I would take to restore order. The ground was uneven with hoof prints and displaced mulch, each mark a silent record of the intrusion, and I traced them carefully, noting the depth, spacing, and direction of each impression as if reading a story written in the soil. I took photographs from multiple angles, capturing not only the immediate damage but also the surrounding context, ensuring that every visual detail would support the narrative of careful observation and evidence collection. My notebook, weighted with notes, sketches, and measurements, lay open at my side, each page filled with precise documentation of tree positions, soil conditions, and irrigation alignment, alongside annotations on the specific ways the cattle had interacted with each section. The orchard smelled rich with earth and ripening fruit, a sensory anchor that kept me grounded as I worked through the logistics of what needed to be done next. I visualized where cameras could be installed to record any further activity, planned paths for witnesses or colleagues to verify the conditions, and considered the timing of future inspections to ensure a clear, chronological record. Margaret Whitmore remained at a distance, her white SUV parked near the edge of the property, and I could feel the contrast between her casual observation and my methodical documentation. Each step I took deliberate and intentional. I walked slowly along the perimeter fence, noting the angles of sunlight across each post and the shadows cast by the trees, thinking through how these natural cues could aid in creating a comprehensive visual record. Every bent branch, displaced irrigation hose, and trampled patch of soil was carefully annotated, forming a lattice of information that could not be ignored or misrepresented. I paused to feel the texture of the soil under my fingers, the granularity and moisture, the imprint of each hoof, and the subtle differences in height across the orchard, absorbing these details as both sensory data and strategic information. My mind traced every potential legal avenue, referencing property laws, HOA regulations, and agricultural protections, linking each observation to a structured plan of response. The orchard itself seemed to settle around me, leaves whispering in the breeze, providing a quiet companion to my meticulous work, affirming the clarity and precision with which I was preparing for the next phase. I straightened, scanning the orchard from one end to the other, sunlight glinting off scattered apples, long shadows stretching over the ground, and felt a sense of readiness build, knowing that the detailed documentation, careful observation, and strategic thinking would transform the day's chaos into an unassailable foundation for action that was deliberate, measured, and grounded in undeniable authority. As the late afternoon light softened, I stepped back and surveyed the orchard with a methodical calm, feeling the subtle vibrations of the soil underfoot, noting the precise locations of disturbed mulch, bent branches, and scattered apples, each observation layering into the framework of the plan I had been constructing all day. The gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze seemed to mark the rhythm of my thought, guiding my attention from one detail to the next with a quiet insistence, the earthy scent of soil and fruit grounding me in the tangible reality of the property I had cultivated. I began to assemble the materials I would need for the next phase, A series of photographs arranged by time and location, meticulous measurements recorded in my notebook, and a set of witness statements collected from neighbors who had seen the movements of the cattle and the actions of Margaret Whitmore. Every note, every snapshot, every recorded observation became a piece of the evidence mosaic, a foundation for the legal approach I was preparing, ensuring that each element would contribute to a coherent, indisputable case. I paced slowly along the perimeter fence, observing the points where the intrusion had been most significant, considering camera angles that would provide complete coverage, and noting the natural lines formed by the orchard rows that would enhance the clarity of future documentation. The air carried the mixed fragrances of ripe apples and damp earth, with a faint tang of metal from displaced supports, a sensory reminder of both the morning disruption and the precision required in my response. I checked the irrigation system once more, tracing the flow through the orchard, ensuring that every kink, bend, and displaced segment was recorded and mapped in my notes, visualizing the sequence of evidence presentation that would make the argument indisputable. My eyes swept the orchard from end to end, the sunlight highlighting the curves of fallen fruit, the angles of bent branches, and the subtle footprints left in the soil, each feature a narrative element in the story I was building. Margaret remained a distant figure, her posture relaxed in the SUV, unaware that each observation I recorded, each calculated step I took, and each methodical measurement would converge into a comprehensive plan that was deliberate, legal, and precise. I paused to take a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the firmness of the soil beneath my boots, letting the calm clarity of the situation solidify in my mind. Every detail of the orchard, from the trampled saplings to the scattered apples and disturbed ground, was a testament to careful observation and strategic preparation, a map that would guide the next series of actions with precision and unwavering confidence. I allowed myself a brief moment to appreciate the intricate structure of the orchard, the way the light fell through the branches, the way shadows traced patterns across the soil, knowing that the meticulous documentation and careful planning were creating an unassailable pathway toward restoring order and asserting rightful authority over the land, each step deliberate, calculated, and grounded in undeniable evidence. The morning light filtered through the orchard, casting crisp shadows across the rows of trees as I prepared to put the plan into motion. Every detail I had meticulously documented, ready to support the legal course I was about to undertake. The air smelled of fresh earth and apples, a grounding scent that kept my focus sharp as I reviewed the photographs, measurements, and notes I had collected over the past 2 days, each piece forming an unbroken chain of evidence. I could hear the soft whisper of the wind through the leaves, the distant hum of traffic on the county road, and the faint murmur of activity at the edge of the property, all contributing to the rhythm of a day that was about to pivot decisively in my favor. I walked slowly through the orchard, touching the bark of each tree and feeling the contours of the soil, the small depressions left by the morning disruption now recorded and incorporated into my carefully plotted strategy. My eyes swept over the fence line, the broken posts and displaced markers noted and cross-referenced with my sketches, each angle and distance checked against the photographs to ensure a precise record of what had occurred. Margaret Whitmore remained at the periphery, her posture relaxed in the SUV, unaware that every action she had taken, every observable movement, and every trace left behind had been catalogued in a systematic, irrefutable way. I arranged the evidence, photographs aligned by time and location, notes organized into a clear narrative, and measurements verified with exacting care, each element forming a comprehensive dossier that could not be dismissed or contradicted. The orchard seemed to hum in quiet agreement, the sunlight flickering across leaves and fruit as if illuminating the path that my strategy would follow. I traced the sequence of events in my mind, rehearsing the steps of the filing, the order of presenting the evidence, the legal arguments I would cite, and the anticipated response from the HOA. The details were precise: the path of the cattle through the orchard, the disruption to irrigation lines, the bent branches and displaced mulch, and the subtle markers left behind by the intrusion, all documented and ready for presentation. I paused, taking a deep breath, the earthy aroma filling my lungs, and felt a calm certainty settle over me. The preparation, the observation, the methodical recording of each element had created an unassailable foundation. I could see the orchard in its entirety from the slight rise in the land, the sunlight highlighting every apple, every branch, and every trace of disturbance, and I understood fully that the culmination of these efforts would lead to a resolution grounded in evidence, law, and strategic foresight. The meticulous preparation transformed the chaos into opportunity, each observation and recorded detail serving as a key component in a carefully constructed plan, and I felt the confidence of knowing that the next steps, executed with precision, would assert control, establish accountability, and ensure that the orchard and its carefully tended trees would be protected and restored. The morning disruption converted into the first measurable triumph in a series of deliberate, legally grounded actions that would culminate in undeniable authority over the land. The sunlight had shifted, casting long, warm rays across the orchard, and I walked slowly along the rows, taking in the restored alignment of trees and the tidy, measured spaces between them. Every detail I had documented now converged into a cohesive narrative, from the displaced mulch to the bent branches, the subtle imprints of hoofs in the soil, and the precise photographs and notes that formed an unbroken record of events. Margaret Whitmore had finally been served with the formal complaint, and the quiet authority of the law was now moving through the channels I had meticulously prepared, a force that required no confrontation but spoke volumes in every signature, every certified letter, and every documented observation. I could feel the weight of weeks of preparation and patient observation settle into a sense of calm inevitability as the orchard itself seemed to exhale, the leaves whispering with the breeze and the sun glinting off the remaining apples, highlighting the careful care that had survived the disruption. The perimeter fencing, now reinforced and realigned, stood firm, each post and stake reflecting the precision and foresight applied to every aspect of the response. I walked slowly to the highest rise in the orchard, looking over the full expanse, noting the patterns of sunlight and shadow, the gentle slope of the land, and the resilience of the trees that had weathered the morning intrusion. The evidence collected, the photographs, measurements, witness statements, and meticulous notes were now organized in a dossier that could not be dismissed, a structured presentation of facts, observation, and consequence that mirrored the careful cultivation of the orchard itself. The soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of rural traffic marked the rhythm of a day that had transformed from chaos to order, and I felt the satisfaction of a plan executed with intelligence, patience, and strategic precision. Margaret remained distant, observing from the edge, unaware that the culmination of every documented detail, every cross-referenced measurement, and every angle captured in photographs had created an unassailable pathway for accountability. The orchard, bathed in late afternoon light, reflected the meticulous care that had endured, the fruits intact, the branches upright, the ground orderly, and I allowed myself a brief moment to absorb the quiet triumph that came not from confrontation, but from deliberate, lawful action. Each element, from the smallest footprint to the largest branch, contributed to a story of measured response and undeniable authority, a testament to preparation, foresight, and the power of structured evidence. I took a deep breath, the scent of apples and soil filling my lungs, and felt the quiet certainty that every calculated step, every observation, and every piece of evidence would culminate in a resolution that was both just and inevitable. The orchard standing as a living record of patient vigilance, deliberate action, and the ultimate triumph of smart, lawful strategy over arbitrary disruption.